Hi everyone, this is Mike here today with another Marvel Omnibus review. Today I'm going to be taking a look at the Jessica Jones Alias Omnibus, which was recently reprinted, and it gave me a chance to pick it up after missing out on previous printings, so very happy to add it to the collection. And I've read through it for the first time in just the last 3 or 4 days. I probably would have read it through in a single day, to be honest, if I had a bit more free time, because this really hooked me from an early stage. I was very invested in this story, I really enjoyed it. So yeah, I felt as soon as I finished it, I had to make it my next review on this channel and go through it and share my thoughts on it really for anybody else who's interested. So I will look through the book today, give an overview of the book itself, the contents, and share my thoughts on some of the story. So I will give a spoiler warning here because I will discuss some plot elements. I don't want to spoil everything though. I might not discuss this in as much detail as some of my other Omnibus reviews in terms of the plot of the contents, just because I think that this is a series that, more so than others, really hinges on the mystery element of the plot at various points in the series. And I do think it's best enjoyed if you don't know exactly what's coming. So there will be some probably light spoilers. Keep that in mind. If you don't know anything about this series and you really don't want to, and you want to read it, then yeah, you might want to come and check this video out later. But if you already know the series, or you're not too bothered about what are hopefully just minor spoilers, then do stick around. So, yeah, another thing to be aware of, this was part of Marvel's Max series, which, as you see a warning here on the cover, means there is a lot of explicit content in here. So the Marvel Max series ran through the sort of early to mid-2000s, I think, and it was basically a line of comics that were intended specifically for mature readers. So what that means in practice is this series and other Max series contain a lot of strong language, a lot of mature themes, there's violence, there's sexual content, drug use, you know, a lot of stuff that is obviously not meant for younger readers, and something to be aware of in here because, yeah, there's a lot of that kind of stuff. It is a dark series dealing with mature themes, but I think it's all handled really, really well by Brian Michael Bendis, who is the writer for this full series, with some really cool artwork as well by Michael Gaydos, who is the primary artist. We also see artwork by the artist David Mack, who did this cover and all the other covers in the series. And there are some small sequences as well, illustrated by Mark Bagley, who at the time of this was also working on Brian Michael Bendis on Ultimate Spider-Man. On the back, we get this really nice image, also by David Mack, really cool. I think that's a really nice piece of artwork, just think it looks great. We've got Meet Jessica Jones, a blurb of the story, contents, so it's Alias issues 1 to 28, and What If Jessica Jones Had Joined the Avengers, which is at the end of the book, and it serves as a really nice epilogue to the series. Moving to underneath the dust jacket, fairly plain design, but nothing wrong with that really. You've got Jessica Jones Alias. On previous printings of this book, it was just called the Alias Omnibus. This time around, Jessica Jones Alias. I guess that's just to clarify exactly what it is, because you wouldn't necessarily know just from Alias. Do like this nice little image, sort of like a brief look into Jessica's office. So this book is the starting point for Jessica Jones. Alias issue 1 was her first appearance. Inside the book we get the credits for the creators involved. No contents page this time though, not in this book. There is an introduction by Alan Heinberg, and then we move straight on to issue 1. It's really cool as well that all the issues are presented like case files. You'll see more examples of that, and as I say, every cover is by David Mack. Issue number 1 being that DM variant that I've got for the dust jacket. So who was Jessica Jones? Who is Jessica Jones? She was briefly a superhero at some point in her past. We learn much more about her past as this series goes on, but at the start of issue 1 we're pretty much just dropped into her life in the present, at which time she is a private investigator working for her own firm that she's created called Alias Investigations. And that's what she does. So she takes cases, she finds missing people for the most part. She does, you know, PI jobs. And opening word of the opening issue of the series, I think really sets a good tone for what kind of book you're reading really in terms of that mature content. Now, she is really, Jessica, just a fascinating character. I really thought that Bendis did a great job of writing this character and making her just fundamentally interesting, so you want to read her story. She is a very kind of damaged character, you know, that for reasons that we don't know until near the end of the series, she quit being a superhero because something happened that led her to conclude that she just wasn't going to be cut out for that kind of life. So she moved into this private investigator role, and she struggles with a lot of trauma really from her past. She is very insecure in many ways, but she's fundamentally a very good person, and we see her multiple times throughout here trying to do the right thing, not necessarily going about it in the right way, but always usually with a good heart anyway. What I want to mention on this page, the reason I've stopped here, is because this is something that you see a lot through this book. This is something that Gaidos does very often, and it's something that might frustrate some people, possibly. It didn't bother me at all, but there are sequences like this where effectively you'd read this like across, with Jessica just shown listening to the person talking and explaining what the job is basically that they want her to take. And it means that you get a lot of effectively just reused panels or images where it's just zooming in slightly from the previous panel. So you could argue that it's not the most creative artwork in that sense, and I guess objectively it isn't, but I think it works really well in the context of what's going on here. Because what this really is, there's not a lot of action in this series. It's not really a superhero story because Jessica Jones makes a point time and time again of reiterating that she isn't a superhero anymore and she doesn't want to be. So this is really quite a dialogue-driven story, very character-focused. A lot of issues are just people talking for the entirety of the issue, from the first page to the last. There's no, big superhero fight sequences. There is some action, it's not that it's completely without any of that sort of stuff, but that's not the primary focus at all. It's much more about, I would say, just developing Jessica's character and showing her interactions with other people that she knows, both clients that she's working for and her relatively small circle of friends and associates. So you do see other characters appear throughout here. There's Matt Murdock shows up, Carol Danvers. There's some appearances by different Avengers. Luke Cage is in here. So you get other, well-established Marvel characters, but they are never really the focus. Because first and foremost, obviously, we're following Jessica. And the stories that we get here, the cases that she goes on, are often quite dark and disturbing. I think this book has been described as a look at the sort of seedy underbelly of the Marvel Universe. That's how I think it is best described, because it really showcases a darker side of the Marvel Universe that you really have not seen up until this point in comics. And gives a lot of things to consider that you didn't necessarily think of, that weren't really presented in comics, just because of the fact that comics to a certain extent have always had to be fairly self-censored, so they couldn't include the level of mature content that is being dealt with in this book specifically, and that was dealt with by other Marvel Max series. But as the series goes on, we learn more about Jessica gradually. And by the time you do find out exactly what happened to her in the end, it's certainly a sort of dramatic reveal. Really makes you feel for the character. It did for me. It was a particularly kind of grim revelation. There's a fun story here where she has to track down Rick Jones, sidekick to the stars, who'd been around since very early on in Marvel history. He'd hung around with the Hulk, Captain America, the original Captain Marvel. Jessica's hired to find him in this story. And she does find him, but not quite in the way that she'd been expected to. And a lot of the cases that she goes on have this kind of creepy feel to them. They take her to these places and interacting with these people who just have this off feeling about them, She finds a lot of weirdos, basically. To the point where there's just this kind of underlying tension where you're kind of just expecting something to go wrong. And a lot of the time it doesn't actually go wrong, at least maybe not in the way you'd think it might. That's how I felt anyway. But nevertheless, there weren't many stories where you felt completely at ease for Jessica. Even though she's got superpowers, she's got super strength and technically the ability to fly, although she doesn't fly very well. You know, she herself says that. Here's another one of those talking scenes again, where you just get the person talking, Jessica listening, with those increasingly zooming in panels. And that's a lot of, as I said, that's a lot of what's going on here. It's dialogue driven, first and foremost. Things move forward through character conversation. But here's one of the stories, in fact, maybe one of the ones that had me feeling that sort of uneasy tension the whole time, because she goes to this small town, and everybody there is just kind of weird, you know, just kind of acting sort of awkwardly towards her. You kind of get the feeling that at some point, you know, something's going to go wrong, and certainly things don't all go smoothly. But this was just such a fun series, you know. It's one of those where I just had to keep reading on to see what was going to happen next. There was, every time I got to the end of an issue, I felt like just read one more. You know, I'll read one more, then I'll take a break. It was that kind of thing. And I love it when I find a book that's such a page turner like that. Yeah, it was just a lot of fun, honestly. I felt hooked on this one. It's a series I'd heard a lot about for a long time, you know, people praising it. And for whatever reason, I've only just got around to finally reading it and discovered that, yeah, I agree. This deserves a lot of praise as a series. And I think as well, when you get to the bits, there aren't many of these, they're very sparingly used, but bits where Mark Bagley illustrates certain sequences, they are flashback sequences that take a look at Jessica's past as a superhero. And I think it was a really good idea to bring in Bagley because, you know, by this point he was very much accustomed to drawing superhero comics, whereas Michael Gaydos, who's drawing the majority of this stuff, I don't think draws particularly good superheroes. So, you know, when he's drawing the majority of this stuff, when it's just Jessica going around doing her detective work, talking to people, it works perfectly fine. But now and again, there'll be a superhero appearing that he draws and it just doesn't look great. I don't think he's well suited to that. So I think it was a good call to bring in somebody else to draw the superhero sequences, not necessarily just because they're better at it, but I think it also works to show a different visual style, to highlight the fact that you're reading a flashback, if you know what I mean. But yeah, man, such creepy stuff. I'm trying not to give, this is difficult because I'm trying not to talk about these stories that I've just read through as I'm looking through these panels too much, because, as I say, these best enjoyed if you just read them, really, if you just discover them on your own. But you know, as I say, she gets involved with a lot of often quite disturbing things, but here's one of those sequences where she's sort of knocked unconscious here and she has a little flashback, sort of. So you see Mark Bagley artwork here illustrating, this is Jessica back in her superhero disguise in the costume with the pink hair, very different look. And then she sort of comes back to it, so you go back from Bagley to Gaydos. Really cool technique, I think, to utilise the two different artists in that way. Issue 22, this cover being the standard variant cover for the Omnibus as well. Another cool cover, just personally preferred the DM one. But this is really cool. Another artist style, can't remember who this artist is actually. But really good because it's going right back to Amazing Fantasy 15 and the Spider-Man origin story, and showing us that Jessica had in fact been around all the way since then, and that she was actually a classmate of Peter Parker's. That's actually the story that gives her origin as well. So turns out she'd been exposed to I think a radioactive isotope that gave her her powers. No surprise that it was something radioactive in the Marvel Universe, but it's certainly a tragic story, you know. It's not just a case of radioactivity gave her her powers. There's more to it than that. She has everything about Jessica's story really is just a bit sadder than most other heroes in the Marvel Universe. Even throughout here, there's so many instances of her trying to do the right thing by telling somebody something, for example, that she thinks will help them, or, you know, just sharing information. and people assume the worst of her immediately. They throw it back in her face. She's just this really sympathetic character. There's just an underlying level of tragedy behind her. But at the same time, she's never a victim. Not really, anyway. Not throughout the majority of this. She is perfectly capable of, standing up for herself. She's got the power to back it up if she needs it. And she's good at it. She is genuinely a good detective as well, so... But by the time I'm, getting to the end now, I need to be maybe a little bit careful here with some of the pages I look up. But the final story ends up involving the Purple Man, which I think also was adapted for the Netflix series as well. But yeah, so she's got this past association with the Purple Man, really sort of creepy story. And it really ultimately serves as a really good conclusion, during which we find out as well specifically what happened with her that led her to stop being a superhero. And we see the Avengers all showing up for some appearances at the end as well. Purple Man's written quite weirdly though. When he shows up towards the end here, he's sort of breaking the fourth wall, talking about the fact that they're in a comic book, and Jessica's kind of saying, "What are you talking about? Like, you crazy?" Interesting. It was pretty weird, unexpected. But I will say this as well, it had a good kind of end point as well. So when it ends, it's obviously not the end of Jessica Jones. From this point onwards, she next appeared in the series The Pulse. And then finally, I think more recently has had her own solo titled series just called Jessica Jones. But here's the what if story. Cool thing about this is it's actually being narrated by Brian Michael Bendis. Well, he's just kind of telling the story of what would have happened if she joined the Avengers. And like many what if stories, the gist of it is she might have had a happier ending if she'd done this. And then we get some stuff in the back. So there's some comic pictures of a sketchbook by Michael Gaydos. Seeing some of that here. I think there's some David Mack stuff as well. Interview with Bendis. Yeah, David Mack sketchbook. I mean, not really sure what to make of a lot of David Mack's artwork. The covers used for the Omnibus, that DM one in particular, I really like. There's a couple of others in here that are good, but a lot of it, it's just kind of really odd. It's not the artwork that really speaks to me in any way. Stuff like this, a lot more experimental than things I'm used to, really. Maybe I just don't get it, but it's not my favourite stuff, to say the least. And then there's a farewell as well. It's pretty interesting. Brian Michael Bendis saying goodbye to the series. And that's it. It's not the longest book. It's as omnibuses go, it's pretty short. In fact, I think it's about 600 and something pages. But absolutely a thrilling read. Really, really cool. Great character-focused story. Jessica is honestly fascinating. And I really enjoyed the way that the series kind of gives a natural exploration of who she is and what she's been through, and just sort of showing us her life, really. By the time we got to the end of it, I felt like I'd read a good, cohesive story. And I do want to go on now and actually read the Pulse series, which, again, I've not read that either before. So that's the continuation of Jessica's story from here. I will probably check that out when I can get a chance. But hopefully this review has given some good insight into the book. If you are, like me, you weren't too familiar with it up to this point. If you're just considering checking the book out whilst it's still available, hopefully I've been able to help you make your mind up one way or another. But thank you as always for sticking around and watching the video and getting through to the end with me. Appreciate the support as always, and I will be back soon to showcase another book.